As the custodian of the country's gateway, we continuously seek to provide a seamless and joyful experience for you. The Butterfly Effect, a set of facilities and services specially catered to guests with hidden disabilities. The Butterfly Effect aims to ensure our hidden disability guests have a seamless and pleasant journey at our airport. We have designated areas for our hidden disability guests, and you will be specially assisted by our trained airport staff. The process is fairly easy and hassle-free. Should you need to use the Butterfly Effect, you can pre-register through Malaysia Airports' official website 3 days prior to your flight. The registration will allow the airport community to prepare for your upcoming travel, ensuring a seamless journey. Upon arrival at the airport, do look out for the Butterfly Effect logo. It is located between doors 2 and 3 at departure level KLIA 1 and at door 2, departure level KLIA 2. You may then proceed to the customer information counter at level 5, departure hall KLIA 1 and level 3, departure hall KLIA 2. For verification purposes, please present an OKU card or a letter issued by a doctor stating the hidden disability condition. You will be given a butterfly kit containing a lanyard, brochure and leaflet on locations of the calm room and sensory walls. It is best to have the lanyard on at all times for proper assistance from our airport staff. Our friendly airport care ambassadors will happily guide and escort you from the check-in counter all the way to the boarding gate. As a Butterfly Effect guest, you may utilize the calm room located at level 5 KLIA 1 before proceeding to the boarding gate. Our calm room is designed specifically to help individuals with hidden disabilities to regulate their emotions and calm their anxieties in the busy and loud airport environment. The interactive touch panels of our sensory walls help hidden disability guests to engage through their touch and sight, encouraging interactive explorations. Our Butterfly Effect guests will have special access at all checkpoints within the terminal. If your flight is at the satellite building, you may take the train or ride the bus and enjoy the scenery. At the boarding gate, you will go through the final round of security checks. Our aviation security personnel will give more time and flexibility to accommodate to your needs. As caring hosts, the aim of the Butterfly Effect initiative is to provide an inclusive and seamless airport experience for all our guests. Good afternoon and welcome to another session of My Airport's Butterfly Talk, a webinar via Facebook Live and hosted by Malaysia Airports. During these sessions, we will be sharing with our audience an often overlooked disability, the hidden disabilities. For today's topic, Adult Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, living with the disorder, we will focus more on adult ADHD and how to deal and live with it. To help us navigate today's topic, we have with us Dr. Rowena Lynn Murray. Hi and welcome to the show, Doctor. I think you are muted.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So a quick introduction. Dr. Rowena is an internal medicine specialist based at Sultan Haji Ahmad Shah Hospital, Pahang. She graduated with an MBBS from UIAM in 2010 and has over 12 years of working experience in the medical field. Just to share with everyone here today, Dr. Rowena herself is autistic and she is also diagnosed with ADHD, where she found out about her diagnosis in 2019 when she was already practicing medicine. Due to that, she has been advocating for autism and ADHD, where she shares her knowledge and experience through her blog and Instagram page. Dr. Rowena is also an active member of the Cogniversity Malaysia, a social enterprise that advocates and provides educational content for the neurodivergent adults in Malaysia. Dr. Rowena herself is a true example that anyone can be successful in life despite how different they are from others. All right, now that we are well acquainted, Dr. Rowena, let's explore today's topic, as I'm sure many of us here are eagerly waiting. So since last month, we have been talking about what attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or better known as ADHD, is and the underlying symptoms. To those of you who missed out our last talk, you may go to our Facebook page to watch the video. With that, I would like to start by asking this, Doctor. Are adult and childhood ADHD different conditions?
Okay, I think that's quite a common question that we get asked lah. So it's basically the same thing. It's just that how it manifests is different lah. So when you look at if you could look at the image that we have put up here, so you will notice that during childhood, the core symptoms of ADHD will be more prevalent. So you will see more of the hyperactivity, impulsivity, and also the inattention symptoms lah. So this is where you will see the child having difficulty paying attention in class. Those who cannot sit still, they are running all over the place, climbing all over the place. But as you grow up, you learn social rules and constructs. So you tend to try to fit in. So you would change your behavior to fit socially acceptable, to be at least socially acceptable. So in this way, the core symptoms will start to be less apparent. But then usually when we talk about changing our behavior to cover up our ADHD symptoms, it requires a lot of energy and a lot of effort. So people with ADHD will tend to develop other psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety, and that would be more apparent as they grow older. So you would see less of the ADHD symptom itself, and you will start seeing all this anxiety, depression. You will see them getting burned out. So it's actually a common misconception that when you grow up, you actually grow out of your ADHD symptoms. But people have been doing some research lately, and they find that actually you're not growing out of it. You just learn how to cover it up, and it's not without a price, lah, basically. Yeah.
All right. Dr. Rowena, ADHD seems to be more prevalent among children, yeah? And we don't hear about it as much when compared to adults. Can you share with us why is it so now in today's time and age?
Yeah, I think we tend to see more in children because previously adults are not traditionally diagnosed as ADHD when they have already grown up. People always believe that if you are ADHD, you would have been diagnosed since you were a kid. So now that we are seeing more and more research about ADHD and we are understanding how it manifests in adults, we're actually seeing a rise in the amount of adults being diagnosed as well. So I think in the near future, the prevalence of ADHD in children and adults will probably catch up and be equal, because those who are diagnosed in adults did not acquire ADHD in adulthood. They just were missed during childhood. So you're seeing a lot of people in the 80s and the early 90s when knowledge about ADHD was not that prevalent. A lot of people didn't really know much about ADHD. So a lot of people were missed, thinking that they were just having attitude problems or discipline problems. So now that we are understanding more about ADHD, we're identifying more and more people who actually suffer with that condition, actually.
All right, that's interesting and something that many of us have not been aware. I'm also interested to know, Dr. Rowena, are the conditions and symptoms more severe among adults compared to children?
I'm not too sure about how it is in general, but from my personal experience, I feel that it gets worse because you tend to have less time and energy to try to cover up. Because as a kid, you are carefree, you don't actually have that much responsibilities, so you actually have a lot of time to recuperate in between doing things. So as you grow older, you have more and more responsibilities. So it kind of catches up to you to a point that you cannot cope anymore lah. So I think the symptoms are pretty much the same. It's just that you have less time and energy to cope with it anymore as an adult.
All right, Dr. Rowena, could you share with our audience what are the treatments and symptoms available out there that can be taken to improve one's condition?
Okay, so for the treatment of ADHD, we divide it into medical, which is the medications that you take, and also there's behavioral therapy. So for medication, you actually have a few groups of medication that you can use. And so basically, how they decide what you take is based on what symptoms that you struggle with on a daily basis. So that being said, not everyone requires medication. You can actually manage ADHD without medication, depending on what kind of symptoms you have. So for me, the medications I find it will help reduce the noise in my head, meaning you don't get a lot of internal hyperactivity. You tend to feel a little bit more calmer with the medication, but it doesn't really help much in terms of my ability to organize and my memory and other symptoms lah. So this is also the reason why some people say that ADHD medications don't work for them. It's not that it's not working, but it's not fixing the problem that they are concerned with. So for me, I do have a little bit of benefit from it in terms of the calming effect. So that's why I think that is important for me. So the other one is behavioral therapy. So when we talk about behavioral therapy, it's not only used in ADHD. You use it in depression, you use it in anxiety. But people have actually done research and they find that the traditional behavioral therapy that we use for anxiety and depression don't actually work as well for people with ADHD. It has to be modified a little bit because of how our brain works differently. So I think this is why it's very important to recognize the ADHD in the first place, because most of the time, even in my case, we always tend to be misdiagnosed as some other condition, meaning when we present the first time, for me personally, I was actually diagnosed with anxiety disorder because when I describe my symptoms, I would say that I can't relax. I feel like my brain is always working and it's very tiring. So when to a person who's not familiar with ADHD, they would immediately think, oh, you sound like you have anxiety. So when you label a person with ADHD as having anxiety, the behavioral therapy that you would normally use for anxiety won't really work as well for them. It has to be tweaked a little bit to match the differences in how they think. And for behavioral therapy in ADHD, it's mostly to change our how we cope, our coping mechanism lah. Because a lot of us have grown up with a lot of negative input, a lot of people calling us lazy and thinking that, like a lot of negative feedback from people. So we tend to be very, we have low self-esteem and we question ourselves a lot. So behavioral therapy here involves a lot of changing our negative mindsets and trying to create more healthy coping mechanisms, basically. So the choice would depend on your symptoms. So it's very important to get the proper assessment and proper treatment because, like I said, medications are not necessary for everyone, and it depends on what you want to target. So you really need a proper assessment in order to determine what you want to achieve from your treatments.
I see. Dr. Rowena, based on your experience practicing internal medicine, what are the most common symptoms that you have seen among adults?
Okay. So first of all, I have to clarify that my field actually does not treat or diagnose people with ADHD. My field mostly deals with chronic illnesses like diabetes and hypertension and things like that. But I mean, I'll probably speak mainly from what I have read before. So the common symptoms that we see in adults with ADHD is usually, actually it's not really a symptom, but it's actually a life event that causes them to unravel, basically. So you will see a lot of adults going in for assessment after doing masters and doing their PhD, and really they feel like they cannot cope with it. I mean, they've always been struggling, but then they finally hit a breaking point at some point, and it's always during this time. So I think I've met, me personally, that was my breaking point as well, and also a few other people I know. So it wasn't that they were fine before this; they were always struggling. But then it's just that when they decided to commit to doing this, masters and PhD always takes a lot of effort, a lot of commitment. So this is when suddenly everything starts unraveling. So I think this is the most common way adults get diagnosed. So others would be, another common one would be when a child gets diagnosed. So usually when a pediatrician or a psychiatrist diagnose a child with autism and ADHD, the first question they will ask, they will turn to the parents and ask, so which one of you has the same symptoms? For sure, one of them will have it because it's highly genetic. So usually one of the parents will actually have the same symptoms. So that's another common way that an adult can actually get diagnosed with ADHD. It's actually I've also seen quite a few number of my friends being diagnosed that way as well.
All right. How long would the patients need to go on medication usually? What is usually the time frame?
Okay, so because the medications actually don't stay in your body for long, so meaning if you take the medication in the morning, depending on what medication you're taking and how long it lasts in your body, by the end of the day, it's usually out of your system. So traditionally, they would advise you to take it lifelong. Yeah. So but there are certain conditions that would make a person be unable to continue taking the medications. For example, they start having side effects, or maybe they develop other medical conditions that makes them unsuitable to continue taking their medications, because most of the medications have a lot of cardiovascular effects. So maybe towards the later stages of life, when you develop heart problems and things like that, it makes you need to stop taking. So, and even some people even take it as they need it, just like whenever they have a task to do, they just take the medication as and when. So there's actually a lot of different ways to treat ADHD, which again I would like to bring back to the importance of getting a proper assessment and diagnosis in order to tailor the management according to what you need and how it will benefit you the most.
I see. All right. As I mentioned earlier, you were diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So, if I may, Dr. Rowena, can you share with us your story and your journey in managing this condition?
Okay. So my journey, I guess, ever since I was a kid, I found it a little bit difficult in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, I find it very difficult to rest. For other people, like when they have breaks during recess and things like that, they will come back and they feel like, okay, I've had a break for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Now I feel like I can continue doing work again. But for me, it's like during that 5-10 minutes recess, I feel like my brain is even more hyperactive. So the only way that I can actually rest is by sleeping. So when you're in school, you don't have much responsibility. So it's okay if you when you come back to school, you go to sleep, and then you just wake up for a while, do your homework, and then go back to sleep. So it's doable when you're in school. But suddenly, when you have to go out into the world, working and studying, you don't exactly have the luxury of having naps and like you did during childhood. So during that time, the fatigue started to catch up on me. So I started getting burnt out. And finally, I've mentioned earlier that my breaking point was actually during the times that I was doing my master's program. So I actually struggled to complete the master's program because it was a working and learning at the same time. So being a person with ADHD, we have very poor ability to switch between tasks. So whenever I have to work, I cannot study. Whenever I have to study, I cannot work. So I can't do two things on the same day. Yeah, it's very difficult for me to switch. So I find it very difficult to cope in the end of the day. So it actually resulted in me having to quit the master's program and take an alternative route to actually get to where I am right now. And so after I quit the master's program, because I've been trying to help myself ever since I was a kid, I would research a lot about self-help, meditation. I tried to fix, it's so-called fix myself. And but everything failed. So finally, when I had to quit my master's program, I thought that it was finally time for me to go and seek help from somebody. Maybe I can't do it on my own. So when I went to see a psychiatrist, I was initially given the diagnosis of anxiety disorder. So after failing multiple treatments, finally the doctor just paused and asked me, so can you tell me a bit about how you were in school? So then I told him about how I was in school, and then finally he was like, you need ADHD sebenarnya. So rather than having anxiety, it was actually an undiagnosed ADHD that was causing the problem, which would explain why my anxiety treatment for 2 years actually did not even make any difference. So after my ADHD diagnosis, of course, I did more research, and there was actually a few symptoms that didn't, even though ADHD explained a lot, but it didn't explain everything. So I just read around the topic, and I noticed that there were a few articles about autism that actually I felt more, related more to it. So ADHD, the impulsivity, the inattention is all there, but I also had a lot of sensory issues ever since I was a kid. So that didn't really fit into the ADHD diagnosis. So as I continued reading, there was a lot of motor symptoms and all that's more related to autism. So I finally went to get seek the opinion of a clinical psychologist lah. So because it's very difficult to diagnose autism actually in adults, because the spectrum is very wide, and it was concluded that I probably had a mild version of autism. But since I am able to hold a job, and I'm still able to communicate socially, and also probably I just have a mild version that does not need a lot of support basically. So that's how I got the autism diagnosis.
Very, very inspiring, Dr. Rowena. All right, but before we move on to our audience, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box if you have any for Dr. Rowena. Okay, let's continue. So, Doctor, if you could further indulge us, what was your experience traveling through busy places, such as an airport? And in your opinion, how do the facilities provided at the airport under the Butterfly Effect initiative help people suffering from this disorder?
Okay. I generally do not like to travel because I'm very bad at planning and remembering steps. So I always feel having to go through the whole protocol in the airport is very intimidating. But I do have to travel on and off for work purposes, and sometimes family vacations and things like that. So one thing that struck me was actually during the COVID pandemic, when we were under lockdown, I was lucky enough to be posted to Bintulu to actually help them out with their taking care of patients there. So when I find that the thing that stood out the most was the fact that there was very clear instructions of what to do. So meaning during the pandemic, they don't want you to wander around. So whenever the minute you step into the airport, there's somebody to bring you to where you have to go. And then there's very clear signage of what to do, when to do it. So it felt like somewhat calming. So that journey was actually quite enjoyable for me. So I think this is somewhat similar to what you guys are doing, right? The butterfly effect also involves making it easy to get to where you are, getting somebody to, dedicated staff to actually usher the person to where they need to go and things like that. So I felt that it was so helpful that having that during the pandemic. I'm so glad that you guys are actually doing that. Outside of the pandemic, I think that would be of a real help for people with neurodivergence, because it's very difficult. We really tend to get distracted a lot. We tend to miss a lot of things. So I think this will be very helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Rowena. Really, really inspiring, and I'm truly inspired by how you're able to go through this journey, and and this is, I think, a message to everyone out there that you can actually achieve anything in life if you don't give up and just do your best. And for me, it's just wonderful to see how you have actually coped and you're practicing medicine. I think that's truly amazing. Okay, I think we will now proceed with some questions. Now, I think we have one. Now, would there be any cure um, currently for ADHD? We have the treatments, but you know, is there a cure
Okay.
today?
So for ADHD, because it's actually a highly genetic thing, so meaning it's something is already pre-programmed into you. So there's only ways to overcome it, but actually no cure for it. And I think another main reason is because there is actually no one pathology that you can fix. Meaning, if you're talking about things like diabetes and heart problems, you know the exact problem that's happening. But in autism, there's actually a lot of uh, different ways that can cause ADHD. Meaning, there's genetic, there's also environmental reasons for ADHD and all. So this makes it very difficult when you're talking about cure. So, but I guess for ADHD, it's very important that you get support because, as you mentioned earlier, you find, I mean, how I got here, I think I relied a lot on the support of my family and also I mean, like the support of family and friends to actually get to where I am. But having to do it alone, I think is very difficult. So I guess to find a cure is difficult, but to find a way around it is definitely possible.
So I think it's best. I think it's best that the support actually plays a vital role in
Yeah.
managing the symptoms. Yeah. So this is somewhat like having hypertension, or rather diabetes. The hereditary from you know from your parents. I
Yeah.
don't like to put it that way, but if it's in the genes, it's in the genes, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So we will now proceed with the question session. Yeah. So we have, let's see if we have any questions. Yeah. So we have from No Aisha Azizi. I would like to share an observation of a friend. Generally, he's good at his job and is meticulous in his methods. However, he always feels unsatisfied with his work. Further, he is rather forgetful and shows signs of fidgeting. Are these signs of ADHD, and what advice can we give him?
Okay, so those things that you describe can actually be a symptoms of anxiety as well. So I think you have to go back and find out how far this goes, and does he have these symptoms in other aspect of his life? Meaning, people with ADHD, they are not only disorganized at work, they are disorganized at home. Everything, their private life, their social life, everything is disorganized. So if it only occurs at work, maybe it's pointing towards something of an anxiety disorder, because sometimes some people are perfectionists, and then sometimes when they become over perfection, they overthink things and then they tend to get clumsy. But if this occurs in every aspect of that person's life, and they have noticed that they have been like this since childhood, it's actually very strongly suggestive of ADHD. So I guess if you do suspect, it would be good to advise him to get a professional evaluation in order to figure this out.
All right. I hope that answers Nur Aisha's question. Let's see if we have some more questions. From Muhammad Firdaus, is it possible for an adult to get autism or ADHD if someone does some kind of symptom mentioned? Thank you.
Okay. So again, we have to go back to the definition and what is the problem with ADHD. So actually, ADHD is a problem with your executive function. So the executive function is like the CEO in your brain. So what it does is it regulates your basically everything, your emotions, your thinking. It controls your memory and things like that. So it is possible to have symptoms that mimic ADHD and autism if you are under stress. So that's why it's very important for you to go dig into the context, meaning is it only happening in certain areas or all the aspect of their life? And again, since childhood or just something new? Because executive dysfunction is a symptom of ADHD, but it is not specific to ADHD, meaning you can have executive dysfunction in depression, you can have it in anxiety, you can have it even in PTSD, things like that. So it's important to know what is triggering those symptoms. Is there a specific thing that they're worried about, or is it just happening randomly without any explanation? Yeah.
Okay.
So, and executive dysfunction is actually a diagnostic criteria for both autism and also ADHD. So that's why even autism can mimic ADHD. And we're not talking about all the other medical conditions, like sometimes even the thyroid dysfunctions. Even sometimes some even misdiagnose autism for dementia and things like that. So there's a lot of things that can overlap. So it's very important to get a proper evaluation from a doctor. Yeah.
I believe that there's a fine line between all
Yes.
these symptoms and diagnosis. Yeah. All right. Perhaps we have one more question. We have Nur Salawati Muhammad Nazri. Any tips for someone who has difficulty to sit still and confined in a small flying vehicle? I noticed that I'll start hyperventilating in any confined space, especially in airplanes. How do you relax and distract yourself in a flight?
Okay. So I personally do not have this what do you call it again, symptom. So I'm actually fine with flying and things like that. But I think hyperventilation in general, I mean, like what we usually tell our patients is also something called a grounding technique. Meaning, when you start having the hyperventilation, you try to pull your what do you call it, attention to something else. So meaning, I think you've heard about there was something about like you think of 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can smell, 3 things you can touch. So that's actually quite helpful. And if you find that it's very difficult to distract yourself, if you're traveling with a companion, you can actually ask them to just keep talking to you, because I mean, they do things that can distract you basically lah. So, and some people actually find it helpful to play around with fidget toys, like all the stress balls, and there's certain toys that can help you out. So I guess it's something that you have to try and see which one suits you best. But for me, I think for when I start panicking, I do enjoy deep breathing and also the grounding technique lah. I feel that works for me, but it might not work for everyone. So it's a trial and everything as well.
So it's more of experimenting what suits you and your symptoms. Yeah. All right. So one more question. Let's see. We have Izhan Fahmi. Can people with anxiety and panic disorder, along with depression, can result in ADHD?
Okay, so ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning the process of happening has already started since childhood. I mean, since even some people before they were born. So it's something that has been there all along. It can actually cause you to have anxiety and panic disorder. So it's called a comorbid condition, meaning you have ADHD. So the fact that you're struggling with life causes you to develop secondary anxiety and panic disorder. But the anxiety and panic itself does not result in ADHD. It just results in something, executive dysfunction that I said just now. So meaning if your anxiety and panic disorder is severe enough, you can develop executive dysfunction that will mimic ADHD. But it actually doesn't exactly cause it.
See, all right. So I think it's best that we actually get a professional advice and we seek professionally all this if we develop any symptoms. All right, Dr. Rowena. With that, we have come to the end of our session for today. With that, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Rowena herself and all our audience for the questions. But unfortunately, that we have come to the end of our session today. So if you have further questions, please feel free to visit our Facebook page and leave us a comment so we can get back to you with an answer. In the meantime, you may also visit Dr. Rowena's Instagram page at Rowena Lynn Murray to learn things about ADHD. Once again, thank you for joining us today, Doctor, and everyone, and we hope to see you in our next episode. For all our audience out there, stay tuned for the next topic. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, be responsible, social butterfly, and adhere to all safety measures. Thank you.